This is an introduction to the content and special features of the book Database Management and Design, offered by MyEducator. I am Gov Allen, one of the authors. In Chapter 1, we motivate the topic, as well as provide some interesting background to where databases are used in the world, as well as what is it that makes an application a database management application. And we cover some of the architectures that we use for implementing database technology. This brief overview of data mining, data warehousing. It's really just motivational stuff. In Chapter 2, we jump right into structured query language. This is a light introduction to structured query language, focusing mostly on the select statement, although we do give some coverage of inserting data as well as modifying data. One of the interesting features of this book is that every time we introduce a particular topic in structured query language, that topic is dealt with in a query box that's interactive. So here we've presented a select statement for the user to take a look at, and the user can run that query and see the results that are produced. And so that happens dynamically right within the book. Students have the ability on each one of these queries, if they want to come and modify the query to see how a difference in the query would execute. So we'll change the category from sneakers to boots and re-execute that query. And we'll see now that what we have back is a list of boots and the various other properties. Now, in a sense, the student has just changed the book here, and so they can always reset it back to the original way that it was when they opened the chapter. So in this introduction, we do cover single table queries, as well as multiple table queries, and entering and changing data in the database. In Chapter 3, we introduce the relational model, and so here we'll be talking about primary keys, foreign keys, candidate keys, the whole idea of a surrogate key, composite keys, and so forth. We also cover the normalization process, as well as give a fairly detailed example of normalizing a database. In Chapter 4, we introduce conceptual modeling, starting with a discussion of reality and models, and then we get into the process of doing conceptual modeling, and the notation that we use is the UML class diagram. And so we begin with objects, object classes, and then move into relationships and so forth. We have various examples, and we will develop the entire model for the Red Cat Shoe Company, which is the running case for the textbook. It's an online purveyor of various kinds of shoes. Chapter 5 takes us to the process of transforming the conceptual model to the relational model, and so we're seeing how to implement the classes as relations, as well as how to implement one-to-many, many-to-many, one-to-one relationships. Chapter 6 then really gives full treatment to the structured query language, and so we'll start again here with the basics again, going through multi-table queries and joins onto group by and having functions. We'll also cover subqueries, including correlated subqueries, as well as the operations to change the database. But I want to take a look at this to show you one of the great features of this book. So here, look at this example here where we are seeing how to extract the month out of a particular date. Now, this is an approach that is not standard across database management systems. And so the database management system that we're executing against right now is Microsoft SQL Server, and this is their approach for dealing with pulling a month out of a date. And you as the professor have the opportunity to pick what the default database is to use for the book. But your students have the ability to come in and say, well, this is, our class is using SQL Server, but I would like to see more about how this is done in a different database management system. Well, they can come over here to the advanced options, and they can choose from the systems that we have available. Currently, we have both Oracle and SQL Server with plans to push that out into MySQL as well as Postgres. So we can choose Oracle here, and the user will save that, and the book will reconfigure itself to be an Oracle book. So now the things that are different about Oracle from SQL Server are presented here. So we'll see, instead of just month of sale date, we say extract month from sale date. That's the Oracle syntax for that. and we can run that query, and now that query is being executed against an Oracle database and bringing back the same data. So we have full copies of the data both in Oracle and in SQL Server, and students have the ability to be able to look at and study both. Chapter 7 takes us into various database administration topics: data administration, database administration, security, multi-user concurrency, backup and recovery. It's really taking us just from the idea of management into the role of a database administrator. And Chapter 8 covers topics about integrating with application software, as well as looking at business intelligence and data warehousing kinds of issues. Now, one of the great things about this platform is that it comes with many built-in assessments. So as a professor, I have the ability to set various attributes of those assessments and decide when each one is due during the course of the semester. We'll just come take a look at the various assessments that we have here, and you can see that there really are quite a few assessments that can be spread out over the semester. The vast majority of these will actually grade themselves. Let's go ahead and take a look at one of those right now. So let's come back here to Chapter 2, and I'll look at the Join Tables assignment here on Chapter 2. And I'll click on this button that'll let me go and configure that assignment. So you can see that we have various things we can set, the points that it is worth, as well as when it becomes available to the student, how many submission attempts the user will have to doing it, when the feedback is displayed to the user, and so forth. One of the things that's great about these assessments that will grade themselves is that we can set it up to allow the user to submit a certain number of times for credit, but then also be able to submit multiple times after that just for practice. And that's the way I like to configure my assessments for these, especially for the query writing assessments. I'll give them 2 cracks at it so that they can make their first submission, see what the feedback is, and then make modifications. And let's take a look at how that would look from the user's perspective. So here, as I'm setting this up, I can take a look at this assessment just by clicking Preview. And this is what the assessment looks like to the user, presented with a conceptual model, or in this case a database diagram that shows how primary keys and foreign keys are related to each other, and then a set of questions. So this first question lists the information contained in the sale table concerning the sales of slippers, whose categories, that's where the category is slippers, and various information about how to complete this particular task. I'll go ahead and fill in these values and then we'll talk about them. So in this assignment, the student will create 10 separate structured query language statements, one right after another, all pertaining to that diagram that's displayed. And then, when they're ready to submit their solution, they'll click on Submit Now. And you'll see that it'll take just a few seconds for the system to evaluate this submission. And so now the student has received the feedback, and we can see that has received only partial credit here. So on this first query, they got 9 out of 10. The query did not include the columns as specified, and so there was something not quite right about what we asked for here. Oh, in fact, it says to list the information contained in the sale table, but they brought in everything from the sale table as well as from the product table. Let's see, we did pretty well on most of these. And here's one where we just didn't even do very well at all. So what categories of shoes were sold in January 2014? We just got a list of all the categories from the sale table. And so you can see that we're looking at several things to evaluate the performance on this query. We're checking the number of records. We're looking at specific things that are in the select statement. We can evaluate, is it sorted as it's supposed to be sorted, and so forth. And so there's multiple things that we're checking when we look at each one of these queries. Here's another one where the user didn't quite get it right. This one they got 4 out of 10, and it looks like, oh yeah, here we're supposed to be looking for Alaska. We're looking for the wrong state, so it didn't produce as many records as it should have. But there's still a lot right about this query, and so they were able to get partial credit. And so the great thing about this system is that because it takes just a few seconds for the user to get the feedback on their queries, they can learn from that feedback and then make another attempt. So they can just click Try Again, and they're ready to make their second attempt at this. You can then configure how you want those 2 attempts to be scored. You can take the highest score, the lowest score, or can't take the lowest score, the highest score, the most recent score, the average of the scores, as well as set how many different submissions are going to count in the grade for that assignment. And so having these querying assessments automatically graded and having them integrated directly with the textbook is one of the great benefits of this platform. Now, as an instructor, I can see all of my students' submissions for this particular assessment. So here's the one that I just completed as a student, and I can come and see the same thing that my students see in terms of the feedback. And so I'll be able to see their submissions as well as the feedback that they saw on their particular assignments. And if I disagree with something that the grader did, I'm looking at this one, what were the categories of shoes sold in January 2014. The student really didn't have the right answer here, but I think they deserve some credit for what they got. I can override the answer for, or score for that assessment just by coming here, adding that value and saying I want to change the grade. And so even though the grading is automatic, it's going to give you the flexibility to be able to override what it does. Let's jump back into the textbook and take a look at one of the advanced features that we have for all of these queries that we do. So anytime the student has a query box that they can edit, there's a link that opens what's called the Advanced Query Editor. The Advanced Query Editor gives lots more choices to the student. When that query is in the book, they really just get to execute it with the default options. But over here in the Advanced Query Editor, there are some changes that I can make. So I'll execute this now, and I can see that it's executing it against Oracle. But I can just right here for this one query, choose a different platform to execute it and see how it would work in that environment. I've got various different sets of credentials that I can work with, including one of them that gives the student the ability to create tables and enter data. On the standard credentials, the ones that are used across the book, if the student tries to create a table, then it will just be that create table statement will be rejected because that's a shared area. And so the user that executes this doesn't have the permissions to create tables. But if I switch this to my own personal student account, then I've got the ability to be able to create tables. And so I can create that table, and then I can insert records into it. And you'll see that I can execute multiple queries at a time just by separating them with a semicolon. And so that should execute that information, and then I should be able to select that information back out and see what I have there. And so your students, out of the box, your students have the ability to be able to create tables, insert data, grant permissions on those tables to their fellow students. It really is a fully capable relational database management environment. And of course, they have full permissions to the objects that they've created. We'll be able to delete those records as well. Now, as an instructor, you are not limited just to the databases that we provide you as an adopter of the book. So you can come to manage and manage your course settings, and there are other changes that you can make here. So let's take a look specifically down here in your ability to bring in other database connections. So let's suppose that you've got some database that you like teaching with. You've been doing this for years, and so you've got your own examples. You can configure those to be accessible directly from inside the book. So one that I've used in the past is a web host called Arvix, and they provide access to a SQL Server. And so I can bring in the connection string to that database, as well as set up default credentials for my students to use. I'm going to go ahead and call this the Arvix connection, and I will supply a username and a password. And so this is the course configuration. I'm now adding an additional database connection into the book for my students. So once I make those changes, if the students come back to the Advanced Query Editor, then they should be able to have access to that new database. So instead of just the ones that are here available out of the book, we now have the one I just created, SQL Server at Arvix. And if I supply the credentials for that option, then I should be able to execute a query that depends on the data that's at this database connection. And so now this database, this data is housed at any arbitrary database, and this one happens to be at the web hosting company Arvix. It's just a place that I've done database stuff in the past. And so whatever database connections that you have that are existing that you want to bring into the book, then you're able to do that and integrate them right into the advanced query environment for your students to work with. Now, this interface is really designed to be used in the class for teaching. Let me show you some of the features about that. So when I'm teaching my students how to write queries and to accomplish various tasks, I want to be able to control how this displays to them. And so I have various options here. And one of the important ones working in the classroom environment is to be able to set the font size of the editor. So I can increase the size of the query so that my students can see that part of the page much better, because that's the part that they're really focused on. Now you'll notice that as I scroll, by default, the query that I'm writing on will stay here at the top so students can look at it. So they may still be trying to get the syntax just right on this while I'm talking about the result set. And that's configured so that that window will kind of stick to the top as we scroll by. And so that's one of the things that the students really appreciate about this environment. Another one that's really interesting here is that every query that you execute as a professor, you have the ability to make that available to your students. And so right now, I've got my queries set up to be available to the students. What that means is that the students can come to the query history, and they have the ability to see all the queries that they've executed, as well as the queries that you have executed, so long as you've made them available. And so while I'm working in class, if I get a fairly complex query up there and I want students to be able to copy it, they have immediate access to what I've done. They can just come to the query history, look at my account, and they can copy right out of this. Or in fact, they can just click on that. They can just click on that example and it will open directly in the advanced query editor for them. And so they're really ready to go on that, and it will execute with their permissions. But it's a way that you can get the work that you're working on in front of them very quickly and very easily. This same interface for the query history gives you the ability to see what all of your students have done. So I can choose a particular student, and I can see the queries that they've executed, including the date and time and the credentials that they executed those queries with. I have various search features to be able to see how my students are doing in their work. Well, let's go back to the advanced query editor for a minute. And I'll adjust my font so it's not so large. One of the things that we found is that when students are working on the various assignments that we give them for creating tables, is that they will create lots of tables, and then those existing table names will conflict with the table names in the current example that we're working on. And so we've provided the functionality to be able to allow a user to automatically clear out their own schema. So let's take a look at that. To do that, all they have to do is open up their query settings, and right here there's an option called Replace My Query With. And most of the time we'll want to leave that query alone. But the other option here is to replace the query with a script to delete my schema objects. And so that will look at the student's database, find out all the tables, all of whatever the user has created, indexes, any kinds of constraints, even triggers and stored procedures that they've created, and the ability to just delete those so they can go back to a fresh start. If the user decides there's something they want to keep around, they can come and modify this before they execute it, but it gives them the ability to say, you know what, I just want to clean that out and get this ready to run. It turns out that in Oracle, because we have this cascade constraints, it will actually look at everything that's there, but some of them will end up getting deleted by a prior statement. So even though this one has the error, it's because the constraint came along with a table that got deleted before it. And so that's the student schema now is completely blank. And if we submit that again, we'll see there's nothing to do except to purge the recycle bin. And so that is one of the nice features about this. The student has the ability to say, look, just set me back to a clean slate so that I can work on the current example without having any conflicts. So those are the highlights about teaching database management using this platform. This really was developed by professors for professors. And so we've developed the tools that we really wanted to have in place to be able to make our teaching go smoothly. We partnered with MyEducator because of their outstanding online system and because of their commitment to keep the price low to the students. It's a winning combination that will improve your students' experience both inside and outside of the classroom and reduce the amount of time that you spend on administrative issues. Hope that you'll feel free to contact me if you have any questions.